Our journey so far has taken us to the edge of the cosmos and into the heart of the atom. We've seen evidence for a creator and a designer, but these arguments, as powerful as they are, can feel abstract and distant. They point to a powerful, intelligent mind, but they don't tell us much about the character of this being. Is this God personal? Does this God care about us? To find answers, we must turn from the cosmos to human history. And in all of human history, there is one figure who stands apart. A man whose life, death, and alleged resurrection have shaped the course of civilizations, inspired countless works of art, and transformed billions of lives. That man is Jesus of Nazareth. Our third reason for belief is not a philosophical concept, but the historical evidence for the life and impact of this singular individual. First, let's establish a baseline. Did Jesus even exist? Overwhelmingly, historians, both Christian and secular, agree that he did. We have sources outside of the Bible that attest to his life. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing in the early 2nd century, mentions Christus, who was executed by Pontius Pilate in Judea during the reign of Tiberius. The Jewish historian Josephus also refers to Jesus, calling him a wise man and a doer of wonderful works, and mentions his crucifixion under Pilate. These and other non-Christian sources confirm the basic framework of the New Testament accounts, that Jesus was a historical person. He lived in 1st century Israel, he gathered followers, he was a teacher, and he was executed by the Roman authorities. The historical existence of Jesus is as certain as the existence of Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. He is not a myth, but it is the central claim of Christianity that sets Jesus apart from every other historical figure, the claim that after being crucified and buried, he rose from the dead. This is an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, what is the evidence? Let's consider a few key facts that most critical historians, including non-believers, will grant. Fact 1: Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. This is one of the best attested facts in ancient history. Crucifixion was a brutal and highly effective form of execution. The idea that Jesus somehow survived the ordeal is not taken seriously by modern scholarship. He was dead. Fact 2: Jesus' tomb was found empty. Shortly after his burial, the tomb in which his body was laid was discovered to be empty by a group of his female followers. The earliest accounts are specific about this. The authorities could have responded within the first few days after these claims were made by producing the body, which would have stopped Christianity in its tracks. But instead, they claimed that the body was stolen. The accusations regarding the disciples stealing his body will be discussed shortly. What I want to point out is that accusing them of stealing it implicitly admits the tomb was, in fact, empty upon checking it. Fact 3: there was a large movement shortly after Jesus' death where many of his old followers, who risked being arrested for accompanying Jesus while he was accused of creating disorder and undermining the empire's authority, suddenly started publicly praising Jesus as a god. Furthermore, historians noted that hundreds of people, many of whom were foreigners that happened to visit the country for a massive local event and thus had nothing to do with Jesus and Christianity, suddenly joined them at the same time, despite the fact that the followers of Jesus were considered partially responsible for undermining the Roman Empire. Back then, if it was believed that you agreed with such people, even partially, you could get you arrested and punished by death. This is a historical fact that most secular historians agree upon. Something happened that transformed these men. They went from being terrified, scattered cowards who had abandoned Jesus at his arrest, to bold proclaimers of his resurrection, willing to suffer persecution and die for their belief. What can explain this transformation? What could possibly motivate these men to face imprisonment, torture, and execution? People will die for a belief they think is true, but no one willingly dies for something they know is a lie. If they had stolen the body, they would have known the resurrection was a hoax. Their unwavering conviction, even unto death, suggests they were absolutely certain they had seen the risen Jesus. Some people proposed explanations for this event, such as the phenomenon known as mass hysteria. This will be discussed shortly. Fact 4: the Christian faith was born and grew rapidly. A movement based on a resurrected Messiah exploded out of Jerusalem, the very city where Jesus was executed and buried. Its earliest proponents were not preaching a vague spiritual idea, but a concrete historical event. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. This message, in a Jewish context where resurrection was not expected before the end of time, took root and spread like wildfire. So how do we explain these facts? The empty tomb, the supposed post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' faith. The disciples' explanation was simple. God raised Jesus from the dead. Critics have proposed alternative theories, such as the possibility that the disciples were hallucinating due to a condition named mass hysteria, where a group of people collectively believe that they saw something that shouldn't be real, due to factors such as fear and stress. Such events were recorded a number of times in history, but this theory fails to account for all the historical data. For instance, most historians agree that large groups of foreigners had come into Israel at the time for a massive local event named the Pentecost, where hundreds had converted to Christianity in a short amount of time before going back to their countries. The reason this is incredible is that there was a lot of initial opposition that tried to discredit Christians, which should have been very easy because of the following reasons. It is well known that during mass hysteria, the people offer contradictory stories that are simply too different from each other to be true. This is especially true if the number of people affected is large because everyone usually has their own story. There were over 100 people who claimed that they were together when Jesus appeared. Even more, people under mass hysteria will almost never be convinced to tell a unified story on how the supposed event happened, unless it perfectly matches their version. It is far more likely that the people affected would call each other liars or even enemies of Christ than admit that some of the things they saw were fake. Also, they didn't have enough time to convince each other if they indeed were hysteric, because only 50 days had passed between Christ's death and the holiday called Pentecost, where the mass conversions happened. Under such circumstances, combined with the pressure from the state and the active discreditation, there shouldn't have been such large conversions in such a short span of time. But the historians of those times claim that they did happen, and the people who were converted were very dedicated. Not even some of the most charismatic leader in history had managed such a feat. This implies that it wasn't easy to discredit their story. Even more, this implies that something had happened that impressed lots of people to the point to conversion. The resurrection of Jesus, if it happened, is the ultimate game changer. It is God's stamp of approval on who Jesus claimed to be, the Son of God. It provides a historical event that bridges the gap between a distant, abstract creator and a personal, loving God who intervenes in human history. It tells us that God is not silent, but has revealed himself to us in the person of Jesus. This historical evidence for Jesus, particularly his resurrection, offers a powerful reason to believe not just in a generic God, but in the God of the Bible. It provides a focal point for faith that is not based on myth or legend, but on a well-attested, though miraculous event in human history. It grounds our belief in a person who walked our earth, shared our sorrows, and conquered our greatest fear, death itself.